We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph Maseches Avodah Zarah. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 47a. On the previous Amud, Rami Bar Chama asked if a person bows to a stalk of wheat, can that stalk of wheat be used for a carbon mincha? And the question is, the stalk of wheat, when it's going to be used for a carbon mincha, it's going to be ground up into flour. There's going to be a shinoi, a physical change. So does that then permit that stalk of wheat to be used for the carbon mincha or not? Again, that's a case of nevad, where the stalk of wheat was being worshipped as Avodah Zarah. And the Gemara suggests that it's a machlokas tanoim because we have a machlokas tanoim in the Mishnah in Tamura. Let's say you have a situation of an animal, and the animal is prohibited to be used as a carbon. So if that animal, what about the offspring from that animal? Is that also prohibited to be used for a carbon? And that's a machlokas tanoim. And the Gemara initially assumed that the case was, for example, the animal was worshipped while it was pregnant, and so the offspring also, it should have been included because the animal was pregnant at the time that it was being worshipped. The offspring also should have been included in the prohibition. However, there's a shinoi, there's a physical change, because at the time that the animal is worshipped, so it's a fetus in the mother animal, but then at the time you're going to bring it as a carbon, it's already an animal, it's already been born, and so therefore that's the exact same issue, and it's a machlokas tanoim. But the Gemara continues and says that when it comes to that Mishnah, actually that Mishnah is talking about a situation where later the animal becomes pregnant, and the machlokas tanoim is zev zegorim, because now when the animal becomes pregnant, that new animal, that offspring is coming from both a mother animal and a father animal, zev zegorim, and the question is whether zev zegorim is mutter or aser. Avol ibru levasof nirbu, but let's say it would be a case where the animal became pregnant first, and then let's say the animal engaged in bestiality. Again, the same thing would be true. Let's say the animal was a nevad, it was worshipped as avodah zarah. So then divrei hakol asur, and then everybody would agree that it is prohibited. We don't say that the shinoi makes a difference. V'hachanami, and here also in our case by the stalk of wheat, ki ibro ulevasof nirbu dami, it would be comparable to a case where again it was pregnant and then became nirbu, then you had a situation of bestiality, meaning to say our case as well is a case of a physical change, and therefore it could be everybody agrees that in our case it is prohibited. And Rashi explains, Avol ibru levasof nirbu divrei hakol asurin dihi uval da nirbu, because in the case of bestiality, the animal and its offspring were both involved in the bestiality. V'gabe nevad nami, we would say the same thing. Let's say it was worshipped. We would say over there, hi uval da nevda, we would say the animal and its offspring were worshipped. V'asurim, and they're prohibited. V'afagav dechazer v'nishtana, even though there's a physical change, ein shinoi benevad lotzio me'isura. We don't say that there's a concept of shinoi that undoes the isur when it comes to nevad. And the Gemara continues, V'ika di'amri, there are those that say, and Rashi explains how this second version differs from the first. V'ika di'amri, says Rashi, Rev Zutra gufe li'isuri hava pasha, that even Rev Zutra initially when he brings the Mishnah, he's not initially saying that it's a machlokas tanoim, and then we bring a statement of Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua that everybody really agrees by Ivru ulevasof nirbu that it's asurin. Rather, Rev Zutra himself was initially saying that from the Mishnah we can see that everybody agrees asur. V'hachi kamar, he was saying as follows, V'itmar Allah, he was bringing the statement that it was said on this Mishnah, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, again the statement we just brought above, that Rava said that Rav Nachman said, etc., as the Gemara now says, and the Bach actually puts in these words over here, that it's Ika di'amri, there are those that say, and then you're supposed to put in the words V'itmar Allah, that Rav Zutra himself says it was stated on this Mishnah, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, that Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avua said, that's the Bach over here, and then the Gemara continues, Machlokas kishenirbu levasof ivru, that again Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avua said that the machlokas in this Mishnah is specifically when the animal engaged in bestiality and then became pregnant. And again, it's a machlokas about zev zegorim. Avol ivru levasof nirbu, but let's say the animal was already pregnant and then there was the bestiality, divrei hakol aser, everybody agrees that the offspring are forbidden, the shinoi does not matter. V'haninami ki ivru levasof nirbu dami. In our case over here as well, by the stalk of wheat, it's also like a case where the animal was already pregnant and then engaged in bestiality, and the shinoi does not matter, and we would say aser. But the Gemara continues, Hachi hashta, how can you compare the two cases? The case again of the offspring of the animal and the case of the stalk of wheat, because Hasam over there, meaning in the case of the animal, the offspring, may kara behema v'hashta behema. Originally it's an animal, now the Gemara is saying that there's no real physical shinoi. It's an animal while it's in the womb and it's an animal after. Dashu dachiza banpa, there's just a door that's holding it back, so to speak. When the animal gives birth, you're opening the door and the animal comes out. There is no physical shinoi. That's why everybody says it's prohibited over there. But over here, by the stalk of wheat, originally it's wheat, and now it's flour, so there's a physical change, and that's why it's a different situation. And Rashi explains, the Gemara says, how can you make that comparison? Over there is no change. Originally in the womb of its mother, it's called an animal, and now it's called an animal. It simply means the doors of the womb are closed before it, but the animal was the same the entire time, and again, that is not true by the stalk of wheat. And the Gemara continues, Boy, Reish Lakish asks the following question, if somebody bows to a palm tree, lulavo mahul mitzvah, can you use a lulav from that tree for the mitzvah of lulav? And the Gemara explains, Be'ilan shenatu mitchila lakach. Now, if the tree was originally planted for avodah zarah purposes, loti boilach, it's not even a question. Tiafilu lehedyo nami yasser, because even for a person to use as a regular use, not for a mitzvah, it would be prohibited. Kiti boilach, when is it a question for you? Be'ilan shenatu ulavasof avodah. We're talking about a tree that was planted and then later worshipped. And the Gemara says, Valiba de Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda loti boilach. And according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, that scenario is not a question, because he holds even over there, he holds even if it was planted and then served and then worshipped, it's usher for a hedyot, it's usher for a regular person, so there's no question. The whole question is according to the Rabbanan. And so here you have a situation, again, le'inyan mitzvah mai, when it comes to a mitzvah, again you have a situation over here according to the Rabbanan where it's permitted for hedyot, but as far as mitzvah is concerned, what's the halacha? Mimoyes klape gavoa olo, is this considered disgusting, so to speak, towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or not? And the Gemara continues, Ki Yasser Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came, he explained the question slightly differently. But Hashera Shebitla Kami Boile, he said the question is talking about an Hashera tree which was nullified from being an Avodah Zarah. There can be bittul again by Avodah Zarah, as we mentioned. The concept of bittul by an Hashera tree is coming up in the Mishnah. And so the question was, Yesh Dichoy Eitzel Mitzvah, so Ein Dichoy Eitzel Mitzvah. Is there a concept of Dichoy that it's pushed off when it comes to a mitzvah, or do we not say it's pushed off? And Rashi explains, Asherah first, Shenesra, again you had an Asherah that was Aser, Afla Hedyot, it was Aser even to a regular person, Uvitla, and then there was nullification, Kedamrin of Masnisan, like the Mishnah is going to talk about coming up, Notel Masha Hechlif talks about taking what regrew, V'kami Boileim Ru'uya Shuv L'mitzvah Lav. The question is now, can you use it for a mitzvah or not? Yesh Dichoy Eitzel Mitzvahs, do we say there's a concept of Dichoy by mitzvahs? Mi'aveshaycha Torah's Dichoy by mitzvahs, is there a concept of being pushed off by a mitzvah, the name Hoel V'nidcha Ba'od Asherah, Yidchol we should say, since the branches of this tree were pushed off from being used for a mitzvah while it was an Asherah tree, so they'd be pushed off, they're therefore pushed off forever. Oein dichor, maybe there's no concept of dichoy and mishtaria, and they are permitted. And the Gemara continues, Tifshot leimi ditnan, let us answer this question of whether there's dichoy by mitzvahs or not. We can answer it from the following Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Chulin. It's talking about kisei hadam, when you shech, let's say, a chaya, so you have to cover the blood. And so the Mishnah says, kisov in isgala, let's say he covers up the blood, and then it becomes uncovered. So pater milachasos, at that point in time, he's exempt from covering. He doesn't have to recover it. Kiseu haruach, but let's say the wind covers it up. So then chayev lachasos, so then he's obligated to cover it. V'yamar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan, and on that Mishnah, Rabbi Bar Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shanu ela shechazar v'nisgala. This is only true if it became uncovered again, meaning when the wind covered it. If it became uncovered, so then he's obligated to cover it. Avalo chazar v'nisgala, but let's say it didn't become uncovered. Let's say it's still covered up. It was covered by the wind. So pater milachaso, so he's exempt from covering it in that situation. V'havinon bon, we asked on that, ki chazar v'nisgala, I have it, but even if it became uncovered, what difference does that make? Ho'il v'idchi idchi, why don't we say that there's dichoy by mitzvahs? We should say it's pushed off. It was already covered by the wind, and there's no more mitzvah. V'yomer Rav Papa, and Rav Papa then said, Zo someres, this proves, ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs. There's no concept of dichoy by mitzvahs, and that's why there's an obligation to recover it. And so the Gemara continues and says, this whole question of whether there's dichoy by mitzvahs or not, even within Rav Papa, he had this question. Because the question is as follows. Mivshad pshita leila Rav Papa de'ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs lo shna lekula v'lo shna lechumra. Was it obvious to Rav Papa that there's no dichoy by mitzvahs and it wouldn't matter if it resulted in a leniency or a stringency? Odilma, or maybe what Rav Papa was saying was as follows. Svukei misafgale, Rav Papa had a doubt. Ulechumra amrinan, and what Rav Papa was saying was that if it results in astringency, then we're going to say that ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs. In other words, in this case where it results in the stringency that you have to do the kisei hadam, so we say ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs. But lekula lo amrin, and maybe we wouldn't say ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs if it would result in a leniency. In this case, it would result in a leniency in the sense that you would be able to use the lulav. Again, that's coming from this tree over here in terms of being worshipped as avodah zarah. So maybe we don't say it if it results in a leniency, and the Gemara says teku. The Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks the following question: Hamishtacha velebehemo. Let's say somebody bows to an animal. Tzamra mahu letchelas. Can you use the wool of that animal for tchelas? And the Gemara says, Tchelas demai. What kind of tchelas exactly are we referring to? Itchelas la kohanim. If we're talking about the tchelas that the kohanim wear when they're serving in the Beis HaMikdash, so hainu boy, the Rami Bar Chama. That's the same question as Rami Bar Chama. That's something to do with the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. V'itchelas letzitzis. And if we're talking about tchelas for tzitzis, hainu boy, the Reish Lakish. That's the same as the question of Reish Lakish before, in terms of whether it's good for a mitzvah or not, what we asked by Lulav. And so the Gemara says, Eino chinami. The Gemara says, indeed, that is true. Delo hava l'mi boy. He shouldn't have asked this question because it really is just another version of the same questions we had above. And the reason why he was asking this question about the wool, whether it can be used for tchelas, the reason why he was asking this question, because there's other issues that he also wanted to address in this case in terms of the animal. Like we said again, the wool, what's the halach in terms of tchelas? But here were the other questions. Karneh, its horns, the horns of the animal. What's the halach in terms of using those for the trumpets in the Beis HaMikdash? We'll see in a moment why specifically he was asking about the music that was played in the Beis HaMikdash that accompanied the karbanos. And shokel, its thighs, ma'u lechalilin. What about using those to make the flutes in the Beis HaMikdash? And b'nei meyeha ma'u lefaros. And when it comes to the intestines, what about using those for the strings of the harp? And the Gemara explains the question. Aliba demando amar ikar shira bekli. Now, according to the one who says that the main shira in the Beis HaMikdash, the song is really referred to song that is made by instruments. So loti boilach, then it's actually not a question, because then it's something that's done in the Mikdash, the vaday aser. If that's the case, it is certainly aser. It's prohibited. You can't use it for these things in the Beis HaMikdash, for the music in the Beis HaMikdash, because that's the main accompaniment of the carbon, is this kind of music with the instruments. Kiti boilach, when is it a question? Aliba demando amar ikar shira bepeh. According to the one who says that the main song in the Beis HaMikdash was that they would sing with their mouths, and the instruments was just something that accompanied. So then we might say, Basume kala bi'almahu umaysinan. Maybe it just sweetens the sound of the music, and therefore you would be allowed to use these parts of the animals to make the instruments. Again, it's just accompanying the ikar shira b'peh. Odilmor, maybe afilu hachi aser. Nevertheless, it still is aser. It still is forbidden. And the Gemara says, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And Rashi explains Techelas to Kohanim. Again, what kind of Techelas are we talking about? Are we talking about the Kohanim? The big day Kahuna L'tzorach Avoda. That refers to the begodim that the Kohanim wear when they do the Avoda. V'kami boilan machshire carbon ke-carbon damu olo. Then the question would be, this is something that prepares to bring a carbon. Is that the same status as a carbon? V'im tim salomar ke-carbon damu. And if you say that it is like a carbon, heichash dinishtanes. So here you have a shinoi. Keshetzovano. So when you're dying it, yeshinoi benevad lahatiro legavoa olo. Is there considered as a physical change by a nevad, by something that is worshipped? Does that permit it legavoa for something in the Beis HaMikdash or not? But hainu boy Rami Bar Chama, that was the same question we had earlier that Rami Bar Chama asked. Hanach tarti bayi boy Rami Bar Chama le'el b'shmaitin. Rami Bar Chama asked these two questions earlier in the sugya. And he tchelas the tzitzis. If the question is with regards to the tchelas of tzitzis of a mitzvah, v'kami boy hol dvar mitzvah mi moyis nevad kilagavoa olo. So maybe he'll be asking by a mitzvah. Is that a problem? Is it disgusting to use something that was worshipped as avodah zarah? Is that like legavoa or not? But hainu de Reish Lakish, that's the same question as Reish Lakish we just had above. The boy belulav, that was the question by Lulav. And so the Gemara then said the question really has to do with the musical instruments in the Beis HaMikdash, lechatzotros l'shir shel karban, talking about the song that accompanied the karbanos. And again, as we said, the chatzotros are the trumpets, and the chalilin are the flutes, and lefaros is nimen shel kinor. That refers to the strings of the harp, and it's all dependent on what is considered the shira, the ikar shira in the Beis HaMikdash. Ikar shira bekli plugsi beperak hachalil. This is a machlokis in Maseches Sukkah, And so maybe we're going to say again, if you're going to say Ikar Shira B'Peh, maybe this is just merely sweetening the sound, or maybe Afilu Hachi Aser, maybe it's still a problem. Meisi, it would be disgusting to use this, V'afilu Intim Salomar, Linyan Dekel Demutter Lulavo. Even if you're going to say by the palm tree, maybe you'll say that the lulav is mutter. Hacha Kevan, the Tzorech carbon here, since it's something that has to do with the bringing of a carbon moist tvei, it's considered to be more disgusting and you shouldn't do it. And again, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabba asks the following question, Hamishtacha v'lamayin, if somebody bows down to a spring of water, Meimav ma'ul nesachim, can you use that water for the nesachim, for the libations in the Beis HaMikdash? And the Gemara says, Mai kami boile, what exactly is the question here? Ilema libavoa kasagid, if you're going to say that the question is he bowing to his reflection? O dilma lamaya kasagid, or maybe he's bowing to the water, and that's the question, whether the water becomes prohibited. But if that's the case, v'ti boile safal hedyot, then just ask the question by a pail of water and just ask whether the water could be used by a regular person. What do you need to have to do with the Beis HaMikdash and the Nesachim and a flowing spring? And the Gemara says, Liolam Lamaya Kasagid. Really, it's obvious that he is bowing to the water. V'hachi kami boile, and the question is actually as follows. Lamaya de kamei Kasagid, is he bowing to the water in front of him? The kamoi ozdu, and that water already left. Now it's other water that's flowing that came in its place. O Dilmor, maybe Ledavrona de Maya Kasagid, he's bowing to the general flow of the water, and that therefore it would become prohibited. But still the Gemara asks, Umi Mitzri, but really would it become prohibited? V'amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, where Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, Mayim shel Rabbim, if you have water that belongs to the public, Ein Nesarin, that is not prohibited. It cannot become Asr, because you cannot Asr something that belongs to the public. And the Gemara says to that, Lo no tzricha, it's necessary, the Kanavi Meyara, the water is coming from the private property, from an individual's private property, and there we would in fact have this question. And Rashi explains, V'ti boilach besafulu lahedyot, so you should have the same question. If the question is whether he's bowing to his reflection or to the water, you can ask that same question to a pail of water, and just to use it for a regular person. Meaning, midi boile b'mechubar l'gavoa, from the fact that the question is being asked by water that's in a stream, which is considered mechubar l'karka, it's considered attached to the ground, and we're asking the question with regards to Gavoa, we're asking the question with regards to the Nesachim and the Beis HaMikdash, Mechlal de Pshitale, so the implication of the question, it implies that it's obvious to Vitalish Ki Agavna Asir Lahedyot, that if it would be water detached from the ground in a pail, and in such a situation it would be forbidden for a regular person. But if the question is whether he's even bowing to the water at all or not, that kind of question you can ask by detached water as well. And so that's why the Gemara says, no, the question really is, when he's bowing to this water, we know he's bowing to the water, but is it only the water right in front of him, or is it the general flow of the water? That's why that would not be a question by a pail of water. Is he just bowing to the water right now in front of him? And that water is gone. That first water, in other words, that water is gone, and now new water has flowed in, and that would be mutter. Maybe he's just bowing to the general flow of the water, to the flow of the river. Again, that's what he's bowing down to, the flow of the water. So then the entire river would be considered nevad. And if you're going to say there's a halach of nevad by something attached to the ground, then it would be prohibited. Again, that was the question. The Gemara then questioned, well, it's public water, so it can't become forbidden in this manner. And the Gemara said, we're talking where the water is in a private area. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Misha Yabeso Samach La'avodas Kochavim, if somebody's house is next to an Avodah Zarah, and Rashi has a slightly different gear, so we'll take a look at Rashi. Misha Yakoslo Samach La'avodas Kochavim, his wall is next to the Avodah Zarah. Shaya Echad Mikos La'avodas Kochavim, his wall is one of the walls of the Avodah Zarah. V'habayis Atzmo Nevad, and the house itself is Nevad, is worshipped. And then what happens is, the Mishnah continues, that V'nofal, then that wall falls down, Asr Livno, so it's forbidden to build that wall. Rashi explains, Asr Livno, so Shebona Kosa La'avodas Kochavim, if he rebuilds that wall, he's building a wall for Avodah Zarah. And so the Mishnah continues, Keitzad Yasa, what should he do? Kones B'soch Shalo Arba Amos Uvon, and what he should do is, he should withdraw 4 amos into his own property and build the wall over there. Rashi says, Kones L'soch Karko Dalet Amos, he withdraws 4 amos within his property, and again he builds the wall over there. And the Mishnah continues, Shelo v'shel avodas kochavim. Let's say it's his and the avodas kochavim. Rashi explains, Haya shelo v'shel avodas kochavim, meaning shemokum ove hakosel, the area of the thickness of the wall, chetzio shelo, half of that area belonged to him, and half of that area belonged to the avodah zarah. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis.